On a stormy night, a car pulls up to a secluded house deep in the forest. Inside, a man named Blake prepares tea for his guest, Drew. Blake offers him whiskey, but Drew declines. Concerned, Blake offers to call someone, but Drew refuses. He reveals that he had been stranded for hours, with no one stopping to help. He admits he was on his way to jump off a bridge. Drew asks Blake why he stopped for him. Blake responds that he wanted to help a lost soul. Leaving Drew alone for a moment to collect his thoughts, Blake steps away. As Drew looks around, he notices certificates on the wall and asks if Blake is a doctor. Blake explains that he is a therapist. He then gently asks if Drew has spoken to anyone about his situation. Drew admits that he hasn't, he can't even get through to his doctor. Drew explains that he tried calling his doctor, but after being on hold for 45 minutes, they only offered him a Zoom call, which he couldn't take because his Wi-Fi wasn't working. Blake responds that he prefers to see his clients face to face. He shares that he practices mindfulness techniques, including laughter yoga, hypnotherapy, and CBT. Curious, Drew asks about laughter yoga. Blake explains that it doesn't require comedy, one can trick the body into experiencing the benefits of laughter through practice. Blake explains that laughter yoga works by simply starting to laugh. Eventually, the body responds and reaps the benefits. Drew hesitantly joins in, unsure if he's laughing with Blake or at him. Their laughter builds, but suddenly, Drew breaks down into tears. Blake moves to console him and, in the process, notices a gun in Drew's possession. He quietly offers Drew some tissues. After a moment, Drew finally confesses, he thinks he has killed someone. Drew admits he isn't sure if he actually killed someone. When Blake tries to ask more questions, Drew grows agitated, snapping that he doesn't want to be analyzed. He excuses himself and heads to the bathroom. Inside, he notices a strange drawing on the wall. He takes out some pills, contemplating them for a moment. Meanwhile, outside, Blake discreetly mixes something into Drew's tea. When Drew returns, he apologizes for snapping earlier and asks Blake about the drawing on the wall. Blake tells Drew that the drawing is from his son, Robbie. Drew mentions that he enjoys drawing too and is quite skilled at it. They sit by the fireplace, and Blake places the tea on the table. While Blake steps away to fetch something for Drew to draw on, Drew discreetly drops the pills into Blake's tea. They both sip their tea as Drew picks up some pencils and begins sketching Blake's portrait. Drew reveals that he used to work as an assistant at an estate agent. As he continues talking, Blake starts feeling drowsy, his vision blurs, and he eventually passes out. Some time later, Blake wakes up to find himself zip-tied in his kitchen. Drew demands to know why Blake drugged him. Blake explains that Drew was acting unpredictably, carrying a gun, and had admitted to killing someone, so he took a precautionary measure. Drew reveals that he was never planning to jump off the bridge, he was actually waiting for Blake. He admits to having been watching Blake for some time. Blake, trying to stay calm, tells Drew that his son Robbie will be back any minute after spending time with his friends. He then asks Drew what he wants. Drew replies that he wants Blake to understand what it's like to be him. Drew presents a hypothetical scenario. A runaway train is speeding down a track, where 5 people are standing. Blake is positioned next to a lever that could divert the train onto another track, but doing so would mean sacrificing one person standing there. Blake immediately recognizes this as the trolley problem and dismisses it as a philosophical exercise designed to spark debate rather than provide a real solution. Blake explains that if he does nothing, it's the moral choice, but more people will die. If he pulls the lever, he actively kills one person but saves 5. The dilemma is about choosing between killing and letting die. Blake argues that sometimes the right choice is to do nothing. Drew then presents a third option, throwing yourself onto the track, stopping the train, and saving all 6 people. Blake says, it depends on who the people are. He would sacrifice himself, if they were national treasures like Einstein, but not if they were evil like Hitler. Drew then brings up Ellie Dawson, a former patient of Blake's who struggled with depression and abandonment issues. He reminds Blake that she was put on antipsychotic medication, under his care. Blake, however, doesn't remember her. Drew takes out a phone and tells Blake that Ellie recorded some of their sessions. He plays the recording, which reveals Blake behaving inappropriately with the 22-year-old Ellie. Blake, visibly shaken, demands that he stop the recording. He then admits that he remembers her, explaining that she was his client for a while before they became romantically involved. Blake claims he had to file a restraining order against Ellie because she became obsessed with him, attributing it to her unresolved father issues. Suddenly, he realizes the truth, Ellie was Drew's daughter. Drew confirms it, revealing that Ellie is dead. He blames himself for driving her away but holds Blake responsible for what happened to her. Drew demands that Blake confess to everything he did, How he drugged her, manipulated her, abused her, and then abandoned her when she became an inconvenience. Blake continues to deny any wrongdoing, insisting that he cared for Ellie but that she became too obsessed with him. Drew presses him, asking why he broke his own restraining order to meet her at a hotel. Blake denies ever doing so, but Drew presents him with a coroner's report, revealing that Ellie took the overdose around 3 a.m. and that it would have taken her about 3 hours to die. He then states that a man matching Blake's description was seen leaving the hotel at 4:10 a.m., implying that Blake was there when she was dying. Drew argues that Blake might not have killed her, but he could have intervened and saved Ellie by raising the alarm, highlighting the difference between actively killing and passively letting someone die. He then points a gun at Blake, demanding he write a full confession. Blake agrees but asks to have his hands freed so he can write properly. Drew cuts the zip tie. Seizing the opportunity, Blake reveals that he knows the gun is fake and stabs Drew in the leg with a pen. Blake rushes outside to his car but suddenly stops, realizing something. He opens the boot. Meanwhile, inside, Drew pulls the pen from his leg and ties a cloth around the wound. Suddenly, the lights in the house go out. Drew cautiously steps outside. Blake appears behind him, already spinning a fabricated story, claiming he came home early, found his house being robbed, and was attacked. To make it more convincing, he begins smashing objects around the house. Blake explains that he moved to the countryside where no one knows his past. He had a reputation to protect and he couldn't do that with Ellie's story pulling him down. He insists that Ellie was the one stalking him, making him feel unsafe. Just as he prepares to smash Drew's head in, he suddenly remembers that many people saw them at the bridge. A different plan forms: he can throw Drew into the river and make it look like suicide. Determined, Blake drags Drew toward his car. Drew tells him that he left his coat inside. Blake tells him to stay put while he gets his coat. Drew tells him to look in his right-hand pocket. Blake retrieves Drew's coat and checks the right-hand pocket. Inside, Blake finds a phone number and dials it. To his shock, his son Robbie answers, panicked and struggling to breathe. Robbie says he's trapped in a box and fears he has been buried alive. Blake listens in horror as Robbie tells him that a man promised Blake would come for him, if he did the right thing. Panicked, Blake looks outside and sees Drew dousing himself in gasoline. Desperate, Blake pleads with him to spare his son, but Drew coldly replies that he didn't kill Robbie, Blake let him die. The episode ends as Drew lights himself on fire while Robbie pleads his father to help him. Like and subscribe the channel for more videos like these.